Hello, welcome to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we will be reading 1 Samuel chapter 16. And the Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take an heifer with thee, and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will shew thee what thou shalt do, and thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peaceably? And he said peaceably, I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons, and called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked on Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servants said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man who is a cunning player on an harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. We will be reviewing 1 Samuel chapter 6. The reason why I keep reviewing from 1 Samuel chapter 8 is because this is a big change in leadership requested by the Israelites that God did not authorize. Um, this is a request that Israel made. God already had a system of leadership that he wanted. And once Israel asked for their own style, God helped them get what they wanted. The significance of this: Israel, they don't have a home country. They're sort of like nomads. They were enslaved for over 400 years. Any history that they had before that is basically gone, because once a group of people become a slave, they have no ties to any land. They have no humanity. A slave doesn't have a culture. They don't really have a religion. They don't have a will. So they don't really have these human tools to connect with each other or to have a healthy mindset when it comes to controlling their own lives, controlling their own relationship with God. Once they were delivered out of Egypt, they were in the wilderness. These harsh incidents were supposed to help them build community, camaraderie, to relieve them from a harsh environment. God gave them all these laws, all these customs, these ordinances to help them build a community, to help them build a culture, to have laws and order. And the plan was, after giving them their culture, give them a land, a territory where they can make their own kingdom and God can be the center of it. The importance is, if they have their own territory, their own kingdom, they can run their lives the way that they want. A problem in Egypt, they weren't able to worship when they wanted to. That was the first request, was to be able to go worship their own God away from Egypt in the wilderness. Pharaoh said that even 3 days was too long for them to be gone. And the reason for their enslavement in the first place, when we look at Exodus chapter 1 and 2, Pharaoh was just terrified of their capability. The Hebrew population was growing in size, and the Egyptians were terrified that if the Hebrews decided that they wanted to turn, well, they would be severely outnumbered in their own territory. So they decided to enslave them. Once Israel got out of Egypt, they were supposed to take the land of Canaan. In Numbers chapter 13, they did not have the right attitude. They were too fearful. And so God told them, "You won't go into Canaan. You'll die in the wilderness, and your children will take over Canaan." And so what happened? By the time we get to Numbers chapter 26, this has come to pass. The group of people who served as slaves in Egypt have all passed, and the only people left are the children of Israel that were born in the wilderness. The entire book of Deuteronomy is Moses talking to this group of people, giving them wisdom and advice to help them. He also disobeyed God in Numbers chapter 20 by hitting a rock instead of speaking to it. What makes that a little bit interesting is there was a time in the book of Numbers, I think it was Numbers 17. There was an earlier time in the Bible where God did ask, no, it was Exodus 17. I'm sorry. Exodus 17, they were in the wilderness and they were attacked by the Amalekites. And this was the incident where he had to hold his arms up over Israel uh, because he had the staff and he had to have helpers to hold his arms up. Well, in that chapter, God told him to speak to a rock for water. When we get to Numbers 20, God tells him to hit the rock and Moses disobeys. So God tells him in that chapter, "You're not going to go into the land of Canaan either because you won't obey me." By the time they go into Canaan, the entire book of Joshua is about them acquiring land under Joshua's leadership, and then Joshua dies. The first book of Judges details that there were several groups that didn't drive out the people that they were supposed to drive out. This is a problem because now when we get to 1 Samuel chapter 8, Israel is demanding new leadership. They did have a legitimate grievance. At first, Samuel, who was the current judge and the last judge, he employed his sons to be leaders over Israel, after him, sort of like how Eli did with his sons. And Samuel's sons were wayward. So Israel complained, but the motivating factor in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 5 and verse 20, Israel wanted to be like the nations around them. The problem with that, the nations around them were the people that their ancestors who settled there first were supposed to drive out. They didn't drive them out in Judges chapter 1. And when we look at Judges chapter 2, verse 4 through 10, An angel came to this group of Israel in Judges chapter 2 and asked them, like, why didn't you do what God asked you to do? Instead of them even attempting to adhere to what God told them to do, they just cried and they died. So the generation that we have now, First Samuel chapter 8, they don't have these same experiences under Moses' leadership, under Joshua's leadership. This is generations after all of those people have died off. Israel demands a new king in First Samuel 8. They want to be like the nations around them. Even after the first king was in Judges chapter 9, his name was King Abimelech. He was Gideon's son. He killed 70 of his brothers and manipulated his way into that leadership position, but it didn't last long. He went mad with power and he was critically injured by a woman. He was so embarrassed that he was going to die from a woman that he asked one of his assistants to stab him because he thought that would have been a more honorable way to go. So, First Samuel chapter 8, they still want, oh, also in First Samuel chapter 8, Samuel tells Israel, like, there are some downsides. I mean, this king is not going to be that great to you. He's going to tax you. He's going to make all of you work really hard. He's going to take your land. And they still want a king to be like the nations around them. So God tells Samuel, help them find a king. They haven't rejected you, they've rejected me. Samuel, again, is the current prophet, the current and last judge. He is the same person in First Samuel chapter 3. He's the child that was living in the temple with Eli, and the famous story of hearing God speak to him at night, and he goes into Eli's room and says, I'm here. And Eli tells him, the next time you hear that voice, you tell God, speak, for I'm listening. That child is the current judge, the current prophet. He's well respected in Israel, and he's the one officiating this transfer of leadership. So, chapter 8, Israel demands a king. Chapter 9, God tells Samuel that Saul is going to be Israel's king. An interesting thing about Saul in chapter 9, verse 2, his appearance is mentioned before his name is. We're going to also see that pattern with David. And I thought that was interesting because when we look at how the other uh, leaders were mentioned in the Bible, even when you look at Deborah, Deborah was in Judges chapter 4. Her appearance was not mentioned, and she was married, she was well respected. Jael is another woman who was in chapter 4. Uh, she helped the Israelites to victory. Her looks weren't mentioned either. Moses, Joshua, Samson, Ehud, uh, none of these other people, their looks were not mentioned. So it's not until we see Israel being concerned about how they appear to the people around them that the leaders' looks are now being mentioned. So Chapter 8, Israel demands king. Chapter 9, God tells Samuel, the current judge, the current leader, that Saul is going to be the new king. Chapter 10, Samuel anoints Saul privately, but he also announces that Saul is going to be the king in a public ceremony. That those two events both happen in chapter 10. I know that I misspoke and said that those were two different chapters, that he was anointed privately in one chapter and the ceremony was in a second chapter or a different chapter, but no, that all happened in chapter 10. Chapter 11, King Saul leads Israel to victory against the Ammonites. So the Ammonites, or the children of Ammon, are the inbred descendants of Lot and one of his daughters. That's in Genesis chapter 19 at the very end, after they were rescued out of Sodom and Gomorrah. First Samuel chapter 12. Samuel addresses Israel in a public ceremony. giving them an opportunity to voice their grievances or to just highlight any complaints that they've had with Samuel's leadership. Once everyone agrees that Samuel has been a good leader before God, Samuel recants the history of the other Israelite leaders, admonishing Israel to adhere to God's laws so that they'll be safe and their king will be safe. He tells Israel that their request in this change of leadership was evil, and he calls a storm, or he prays to God for a storm that manifests, terrorizes Israel into repentance. Chapter 13. Saul's son Jonathan destroys a military structure for the Philistines. Israel was so terrified that they began to hide. Out of fear, Saul makes an unlawful sacrifice to try to gain the confidence of the people. In chapter 14, Jonathan, and now only one man by himself, attacks the Philistines again, and he's successful in the attack. He's so successful that the men that hid in the previous chapter realigned with Israel under Saul's leadership. Also, there were Hebrews that had joined the Philistine army before any of this happened. They saw how courageous and successful Jonathan was in his attack. They left the Philistine army and joined under Saul's leadership. But it wasn't because of Saul, it was because of Saul's son. And Saul, his insecurity, his fear, this is going to come up later as we see David ascend, because David is going to be the new king. Chapter 15 goes into detail. In 1 Samuel 14:48 at the end, the Bible tells us that King Saul kept wars going his entire rule and as king. He kept getting into wars. But one specific war or specific battle was 1 Samuel chapter 15 against the Amalekites. Um, God instructs Saul to destroy all of Amalek. So, um, a few reasons why God might have said destroy everyone, destroy man, woman, child, animals, destroy it all. The Amalekites are the descendants of Esau and a Canaanite woman, Ada, and we see that lineage begin in Genesis 36:16. In Exodus chapter 17, the Amalekites attacked Israel when they were in the wilderness. This was the battle where Moses had to hold his staff over Israel. He had climbed up into a cliff and he was holding his arms outstretched. He had to have assistants help him. So that was the Amalekites. And in that chapter, God says, I will blot their name out from under heaven. It was a serious offense. Um, And then the other thing about the Canaanites or being connected to Canaan, um, just Leviticus chapter 18, all those sins were listed. And the Canaanites were making the land sick because of the acts that they were committing on the land. So that lineage that began with Esau, that was before God told them don't make any connections, but there was already, even back then, with Isaac and with Abraham, where there was this thing where, we don't want to marry, you don't want you to marry anybody that's a Canaanite. We don't want you to marry a Hittite. And Esau married two Canaanite women, and now they're the ones vexing the children of Israel. The significance of chapter 15, God instructed Saul to kill everything, men, women, children, animals, but because he was fearful of the people yet again, he let Israel bully him into keeping the good animals. Samuel confronted him about it, and he said, "Well, he begrudgingly tells him the truth that he feared Israel. He tried to make it seem like, oh, well, I followed the laws. I just, they wanted to take these animals to give an offering to God. God said, destroy everything. So why would you take something that God told you to destroy to try to give it to him? And after Samuel grills him, he just says, "Okay, I was scared." So now we have First Samuel chapter 16. God tells Samuel to go to Bethlehem and anoint a new king of Israel. To avoid suspicion from Saul, God advises Samuel to bring a cow and make a burnt offering in Bethlehem. God leads Samuel to invite Jesse and asks him to introduce his sons. God reveals David to be the new king, and Saul anoints him. Saul begins to suffer an affliction that his servants determine is an evil spirit from God. They employ David as Saul's harp player. David had a reputation as a skilled musician. David's music relieved King Saul of his ailment. Summarize this a little bit more in detail. God tells Samuel that he wants him to anoint a new king for Israel. Samuel is concerned with Saul's retaliation because we see here, how can I go if Saul hears that he will kill me? God says, well, okay, we'll take a cow with you and you'll be able to say you're making a sacrifice and actually make a sacrifice. Invite Jesse and I'm going to have him introduce his sons to you. When Samuel gets to Bethlehem, we have the elders coming to meet him trembling. That's something I should have mentioned in the previous chapter. In First Samuel chapter 15, Saul was required, or God commanded him to kill everyone, including King Agag. He captured King Agag and had him alive with the animals. And Samuel, he played it cool for a moment, like he was okay with everything. And then he asked to speak to King Agag. And Agag, thought things were sweet. And he said, "Oh, so I guess we're cool now." And instead of, saying anything, um, Samuel just cut him into pieces, had a sword and hacked the man into pieces. Um, So now that's the last time everybody saw him. So now when he's coming to Bethlehem, everybody's wondering, like, because you played cool last time and you did that. So is everything good this time? So Samuel reassures them that I am here peaceably. I've come to make a sacrifice to the Lord in Bethlehem. So when he invites Jesse to the sacrifice, Jesse introduces his older son Eliab, and Samuel thought to himself, "Well, surely this is the one God wants." And God said, "No, that's not the one I want. That's not the one I want." And then Jesse calls another son, and God said, "No, I don't want him either." Jesse invited all of his sons, and God said, "No, none of these. Mm-mm. Do you have any more children?" And Jesse said, "Well, there's another guy. He's keeping the sheep." When he bought him, now we see, before we even know his son's name, his appearance is being mentioned again. This is the same pattern that I pointed out about Saul. Now that Israel is concerned with how they're going to look to other nations, well, now their leaders have to have, some sort of redeeming physical quality now, whereas before wasn't mentioned. He was ruddy, and the term ruddy means red, healthy reddish color. It was hard for me to think about what this would mean, but these children right here to me are like a perfect what I thought in my head when I think of ruddy. Reddish, these are reddish, that's what that looks like. Reddish, healthy glow. Um, I don't know. I don't really think this is reddish. I don't think any of these other things are reddish. This reddish is a healthy color, and no offense, but does this look healthy? These children look healthy. Okay. My opinion. Try not to hit the microphone. David is mentioned, his appearance is mentioned before his name. God says, yes, this is the one. So he anoints David. We learn that that God's spirit departed from him, from Saul, and an evil spirit tormented him. And I just wanted to point out a harmful spirit from the Lord. This is, God didn't say he sent an evil spirit. And this is just when we see things like this of God being credited with things that he didn't say he did. That's just something we have to pick out and make sure that unless God said he did something, we have to take into account that somebody who's writing this said this. To me, what this sounds like is a mental affliction, but whatever. But he started to have these fits where he was vexed by some spirit, and David was known as being a skilled harp player, and harp music was thought to uh, soothe the soul and drive away evil spirits. So, because he has a reputation for being a skilled player, Saul's staff employs him as the harp player for Saul. Uh, so they tell his father Jesse. Jesse sends uh, a donkey with gifts with Saul. And when he got there, it says Saul loved him greatly. And David became his assistant armor bearer. And when he played his harp, he drove the beast, this evil spirit away from Saul. So that is all we have for chapter 16. I will try harder to I'm not going to say anything else. I love you. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. Have a wonderful day.